Yeah, I'll go ahead and start off here. Scott, thank you for joining us today. And for those that joined the webinar here, a lot of folks might say, Box Professional Insurance, we're in insurance. Why are we bringing Buckler into the conversation? And it gets pretty simple for us. What we're looking to do is we know that when our clients have a strong cybersecurity posture, it reduces their business risk overall. Now, certainly insurance is for those worst case scenarios when they go above and beyond that, but it's really, really simple. The better cybersecurity you have, the less likely they're even going to get into your system and save the advisory clients effort and recovery, because the worst thing to try in recovery is your reputation. So that's why I'm excited to introduce Scott and have a conversation with what Buckler's doing and what activities you're helping to make stronger situation for advisors. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Chad. Great to be here. We've established a very strong relationship with Vox and Chad and his team for the reasons why he mentioned. And I'll just go ahead and kick it off here. We're just a little intro with myself, and then you see a little bit about Chad, who's been the president of Vox Professional Insurance now for a good part of 7 years, I believe, right, Chad? Yep. You started it. CEO of Buckler, licensed attorney, had some deep experience with regulatory services and consulting in working with broker-dealers and RIAs to help them check due diligence boxes in the past with a firm called FactRight. A lot of those types of experiences, understanding the pain points of compliance officers, understanding the decision-making, how they make decisions, how they don't make decisions is really an integral component to how we go to market at Buckler. But Buckler is, as Chad said, a cybersecurity program that's meant to produce a verifiable program, cyber compliance program for our clients. And what we're talking about today, however, is really getting into why an RIA network would want to care much about a cybersecurity program. Chad, I'll turn this over to you to see if you want to go through this area of the networks of RIAs, and then we can kick it back to the compliance side.
Yeah, what we know in a good RIA business is there's just a lot of components to it. And one thing we're doing here at Box is really outlining the different components and also the industry of the RIA industry and financial services industry. And each one of these, and there's a Venn diagram where they overlap. But when you back up, even if you look at the tech stack is right in the middle, when we're talking about cybersecurity, each one of these points where they overlap becomes a critical, or can be a critical access point if somebody's trying to get into the system. So, of course, with any sort of a group within, so today we're talking with different industry groups, they have members, and what they're usually focused on doing is helping bring to the members what's needed to help build a stronger organization. So why don't you talk to Scott a little bit? I would be interested to know, Vincent is the founder of Buckler, and kind of what was the impetus that they said, hey, we need to build a tool to actually build a stronger cyber support.
Yeah, that's right. So Vincent Guillot is the founder. Several years ago, working with an MSSP at a financial services firm, they had a breach. Regulators or the FBI, one of the two, had actually come in to investigate the breach. There was a loss, and they had asked the question, did you have a cybersecurity policy? Let's take a look at it, and let's see how you had followed it. And the firm, unfortunately, didn't have that. Not to say they weren't doing good work on the information security side, but they didn't have the verifiable stuff needed to show the regulators they were implementing as they had said they would in the policies. And so Vincent had gone and looked for something off the shelf, as a good entrepreneur does. When you can't find something off the shelf, you build it anyway. And so that started 4 years ago. We had launched the new version of the system, which we'll see a little later, last year. But to this particular point, I think it's right, not only from the tech stack standpoint, that there's going to be increased vulnerabilities as more and more RIAs establish more technology up and down the stack. But you could also look at this from an operational standpoint. One of the clear areas that is a gap in most of the conversations we're having is there might be information security and good information security for RIAs that care about cyber security. And those, we're seeing those numbers increase day over day, of course. But there's very little communications between it and compliance as to how the information security is being done on a compliant basis. And that's a hard, very hard thing to do if you don't have the right system. And so there's part of this is both, here's the vulnerabilities on this tech stack that will increase over time with these RIAs, but also there's a lot of functionalities between offices internally that have difficulty in communicating and getting things done according to a policy.
Yeah, and then the one thing that I didn't bring up before this call, but what we don't have on there is the overall weather, which is AI, and how that's being implemented in a number of different areas in an organization.
That's right. That's right. And that's increasingly, we're going to see that accelerate over the next several years and see that as another area where I think regulators are going to start asking questions. But here's really what's driving this. Prior to the pandemic, there wasn't an industry focus, if you will, on cybersecurity. Not to say it didn't exist, but with the pandemic, we have more remote work models, and the BYOD, bring your own devices, to in these types of organizations is a clear threat and a clear vulnerability for a lot of these firms. We're moving, like the tech stack's increasing. Are we doing a good job of checking vendors on a consistent basis? Obviously, geopolitical, environmental conditions are changing, and then there's increased customer expectations. The cybersecurity is on the minds of many of the clients that are with these RIAs, and we know that that's going to be a differentiation over time. And in fact, you can probably consider cybersecurity as part of fiduciary duty.
Yeah, actually, what I want to mention real quick, Scott, is some clear examples of bringing your own devices. That, in combination with state actors getting involved, what a lot of people don't know on the insurance side, on cyber insurance, that actually the insurance market froze up in 2022 for a few months. What that means is carriers stopped offering coverage for a few months. And that was because of the state actors that damaged and caused intrusions into some very large systems. And carriers just said, wait a minute, we can't afford this. And they stopped for a little bit. They got that worked out and it got going again. But these geopolitical and challenges are not slowing down. They just seem to be increasing.
And Chad, from your desk, can you describe the relationship between the regulators and the insurance companies?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. The insurance carriers, there's not a formal handshake, but I think of it as kind of an informal handshake between what the regulators are requiring and the carriers and underwriters are expecting. In fact, the questions are implicit that you are doing what the regulators require. Now, the challenge is for most firms when they're doing it, if you have a staff member just filling it out, they're like, yeah, I think we get that done. Click, click, click. They got it done. And then if it comes to a claim and those requirements are not being met, we have a different sort of a challenge. And what we work hard to do is make sure that if a claim comes up, that the coverage is going to apply. And what I love about what Buckler's doing is you're actually verifying and making sure that not only are the policies in place, but do we have good organization? So we're following up and confirming regularly that they are in place.
Making it easy. Here's a couple of moving threats in the landscape, as we talked about just a second ago. These are a number of items that are continuing to increase in the threats, and the landscape gets broader and deeper as we continue to increase our use of technology. So when we talk about history repeating itself, we talk about standard compliance. Back in 2000, 2001, the SEC said you needed a CCO in your organization. Well, at that time, there wasn't one. And most firms said, why do I need a CCO in my organization? It took some time, but everybody ramped up, and now it's industry standard. Everything revolves around compliance. Cyber compliance is at that point in regard to how firms need to be in a good stance, verifiably protected against regulatory threats, but also cyber threats. And we think over the next year, 2, 3, we hear SEC with Rule 10, That's in its infancy, still in the comment period, but good chance that it passes in the next year or so. That'll change the landscape altogether. But the SEC already has the framework with which it can do a great job of regulating its the RIAs, and the CCOs are paying attention and taking notice. Marketing is a big deal, but obviously cybersecurity is right behind it in terms of considerations and concerns. So here's a little bit about
Scott,
that. Yes,
quick
please.
question for you. Yeah, on that last slide there, we're looking at, surveys are fantastic. I know you're talking with advisory firms all the time of all different sizes. Can you
Yep.
give me a quick example of a concern that you hear coming up fairly regularly, specific about the regulatory environment on cyber?
Yeah, the most pressing concern is actually when an organization has a really good cyber policy that they spent a lot of money on. They spent a lot of money on the policy. It's really well done, and they're not implementing it. And it's almost worse than not having a policy at all. So that's the number one issue that we're coming up against. Following traditional, more standard compliance protocol is routine and rote for these organizations. Following cyber security compliance protocol is not routine. It's a new muscle. It's difficult. It is time consuming. And so that's the area, that's the gap. And we can see why most of these CCOs would be concerned about cybersecurity, because they have no visibility as it matches up against what they're going to be held responsible for.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. And at what size do you usually see where they actually have a CISO on staff?
Well, you can get these CISOs are not uncommon for 500 to 750 million dollar AUM, but at $1 billion and above, you typically have, whether it's a CISO or a VP of information security, somebody's on staff. Now, mind you that the securities rules and the cyber rules are evolving in such a way that they're asking who's the CISO in the organization in some cases. For instance, the New York DFS, who's your CISO? You have to name somebody in the organization. So if you don't have one, there may be a time that's coming, and not in the too distant future, where you're going to have to name somebody. It may be the CCO and or somebody else, and that's difficult.
Yeah, so that's the point of it's a new muscle that's getting exercised. Got it.
For sure.
Thank you.
For sure. So here's just a rundown of the evolution of cyber regulations, right? Who's hacking us? It's individuals, organized crime, nation states. We know that. Regulators are responding. So we're going from vague to prescriptive regulations, suggestions or highly recommendations, to requirements, attestation. Yes, we did it. We'll check the box, to evidence. There's still a lot of attestation that goes on within the financial services world, even in 2024. And of course, we're always in cybersecurity, so we're surprised when we see it, but we know there's just a matter of time until that starts to boil down into an industry-wide requirement. And it's already there in terms of an industry-wide requirement. And so we're starting to see more and more enforcement. Don't have a cyber program, you're going to get dinged. Fines, people who are now being held liable, obviously CCOs, CISOs are on the radar screen here. And then obviously with you, you start seeing premium differences, right, Chad, and claims that are difficult to not difficult to deny. Insurance firms like to deny claims, and if you can't show that you're in a good position, then you have a risk.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great slide. What's interesting, this is what's happening. It's just happening if there is no intrusion or attempted intrusion. If there's an intrusion or attempted intrusion, then the likelihood of a claim goes up, and this gets a lot messier real fast.
That's right. So PII is highly sought after information. They can sell it on the dark webs, the bad guys. And so RIAs, as a function of being in the financial services world, no matter what their size are going to be increased targets for the bad guys, more so than most average small businesses. So we talked about, yeah, please.
I just say an amusing thing that comes up fairly often with clients when we're talking to them about their PII and protecting it. They'll say, I tell my clients all the time, don't send me your social security number, and they email it to me, you know? So, and obviously you can only do so much, and you're going to educate the clients and help them know as these networks are educating their advisory firms. But that's one reason to have a really good program. So if that information is breached, it could have been breached on the client side, not on the firm side. When you have a good program in place and you're meeting those standards and you're consistent with it, you've got great defense.
Yes, yes. Consistency is key.
Hey, we've got a question here, Scott, that came up from an attendee. And they
Yeah.
said, does it take days, months to have an active regulator? Let's see. To have a cyber program ready, how long does it take? Is it days, weeks, months? What does that look like? If you had started from zero, let's say you're a $500 million firm, how long does that process take to get everything in play?
Yeah, with one phone call, if you don't have any policies at all right now, it's very quick. We can do one onboarding call, and once that call is done, we could have a policy up and running. Now, the difficulty comes in when you have a lot of different policies that are not in the same kind of file. They're all over the system, if you will. Nobody's following them, so nobody's been able to tie back and forth. And so there's a lot of work that we've done with clients to be able to sift through that, optimize it, create efficiencies, and then build the system inside Buckler for a compliant policy. So a lot of it depends on how much is already in place in terms of the timeline, how quickly we can get that from the client. But most of these smaller mid-sized firms, we can do it after one phone call. You can have a compliant policy.
Great.
So we talked about standard compliance. Here's all of the duties on standard compliance. And then we talked about a gap. And then how are we looking to fill that gap? So the first part is, how are you going to build a cyber management program? And what's the basis of a program like this? And one of the features, if not the unique feature of Buckler's, is policy matching that's being done across all the different regulations that you see on the left-hand column of this picture. First, we have inside of the protocol, inside of the platform, there's risk management, information security policy. That's all those policies are combined in modules in Buckler. The way in which we've been able to construct that is through a policy matching system that uses the categories of NIST. The actual NIST regulations are not in our system, but there are categories of NIST, which is from the Department of Commerce, that guides all federal agencies in how they construct, by and large, how they construct their cyber compliance. So from that, you can start developing patterns that are visible and identifiable across all of these different regulatory agencies. And so if you're a SEC, FINRA, New York DFS regulated firm, maybe you even have client medical information, which is not uncommon. You also have HIPAA that applies. What we're able to do is build one policy that creates modules that applies to all of these different regulatory agencies. It reduces inefficiencies by having to duplicate efforts, and provides the client with a verifiable compliance policy that is updated through the work and the management of the policy, depending on which regulators shows up to their door. So this is very unique in the industry, and it's one of this feature in particular, and the simplicity with which we've done it is gaining a lot of traction in the market.
Yeah, and Buckler's also integrated other industries. For example, we've had firms that have broken away from, let's say, an LPL, and you've already put those things into play, and we're able to keep that and or simplify it, so it makes
That's
it
right.
easier. Yeah,
that's right.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, you can plug and play depending on which regulations affect which financial services agency. And this is just the regulations that we talked about, right? The risks alerts from the SEC, the requirements from FINRA, the New York DFS cybersecurity program. All of this is moving in the same direction. It's almost agnostic as to alphabet soup here at the very top. All of this is moving in the same direction because it's NIST based. There's really federal guidance on how cybersecurity needs to be done and performed. And these firms are just issuing new regs simply based on the margins and changing them. Although New York DFS in particular, we talked about this earlier, is the most prescriptive, the most aggressive, and is indicated almost implicitly through a lot of risk alerts that is issued, that its most recent amendments will be heavily enforced by its staff. So interesting, New York DFS is probably the most aggressive agencies of all the three here you see here, but the SEC is paying attention and has noted that they're watching the New York DFS, how it plays out, and that might be instructive on Rule 10 or what comes from that.
Yeah.
So we talked about the cyber management platform, and this is it. It's been recognized by some of the favorite technology gurus in the financial services space, Bob Veras, Joe Bruckenstein at T3. We won the award in 2023 as Emerging Technology Award. Really happy to have that. These are a few case studies that we've talked about before, Chad, you and I, just off the cuff. But both these, one large broker-dealer, one mid-sized hybrid RIA. The large broker-dealer had FINRA flagging that there's going to be a cyber exam check. They gave them a heads up. We were quickly able to move and get them a policy stood up and established, such that when the FINRA regulators came, they had a compliant cybersecurity policy. And in fact, off the record, FINRA, the senior examiners took a hard look at Buckler, and according to our friends over this large broker-dealer, liked what they saw. So we have a little bit of a plug there. The other one was a large hybrid RIA. Good case study where you had great solid security on the information side. You had great CCO. Again, they have a very hard time performing all the functions needed to keep compliant on cybersecurity.
Yeah, Scott, we've got a really good question that came in, and it's really good timing. If a firm doesn't have a CCO or a CISO and is smaller, does Buckler still apply, or who would manage it?
Well, every firm's got a CCO, one way or the other, but most small firms don't have a CISO. And so what we're able to do, and what we've done with clients increasingly, is to help walk them through program management as a supplemental service to the Buckler subscription. Over time, what we're looking to do is create more and more education around this and awareness around this area, right? Cybersecurity in general, but cyber compliance specifically, and then enable more of our firms that are subscribers to have a manager on staff that's able to manage the system. Again, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, it's simply work, right? To comply with these, that's why it's hard. To comply with these takes time on a monthly basis. Buckler walks you through that and keeps it very simple. But there's somebody that needs to have at least a basic understanding of how to manage the system and what cybersecurity is to stay compliant, and to make sure that the compliance, or to make sure that the firm has an active, updated policy. So we're helping clients walk through that program together.
Yeah, so if they're a boutique type firm with 3 or 4 employees, they pick the person who's going to sit in that role. Just like on the ADV, there's always a CCO that signs it, and that's where you're helping organize and walk through that, even for the state registered RIAs all the way up to the multi-billion-dollar ones.
That's right. That's right. And you can imagine when there are 3 people in one office, or 4, maybe they're 80, 100, $200 million RIA. It's difficult. And we're continuing to explore ways in which to make it easier for a lot of these firms to do it. But we'll be there to help them all the way through. Where do we see this? I mean, these are gaps, and we talked about the gaps, but one gap is there's absolutely no mention of cyber compliance, and there's no awareness of information security at some of these firms. And that's the reality of financial services. There's a lot of different advisory shops. They're all different. They all care about different things. Nobody got into being an advisor because they love cybersecurity regulations, but that's not the way in which the regulators are going to increasingly require these firms to be the position that they're going to be. So we've seen others that are starting the initiation of it. And again, maybe they have policies, or found some kind of solutions. And then the more advanced ones that have great policies, they have great information security, and maybe they've partnered with maybe some more static compliance solutions, but they're having difficulty in those as well. And so with Buckler, what we've tried to do is just hit the easy button, right? It's as simple and elegant as you can make it, as a partner with our clients.
Yeah, here's where I have to confess. Box Professional is a client of Buckler. And one of the things that came, because we are considered a boutique firm at, less than 10 employees helping out the industry. What was great, pun intended here, is you basically helped us go through and check the box and make sure a lot of the things we were doing were the right things to be doing from a cybersecurity standpoint, but we
Right.
didn't have it organized very well, and it wasn't that clear. If a regulator came in and said, hey, we need to see X, Y, and Z, I wouldn't have, I would say, give me a week. Now we know we can just go in there. And to the question that came up earlier, for us, we took it kind of slow. I think it took us a couple of weeks to get through it, but we did it slow because we had other things we had to keep going at the same time. So there's a personal example.
Yep. And what we did with Box was we went through the policy matching exercise to ensure that the right regulations are inside of the Box policies. And that's really the sweet spot of and unique sauce or special sauce of what we do at Buckler, is it matches with all you need to do to align and comply with regulations. Again, you could sleep very well, knowing that there's nothing that's been uncovered in terms of all the regulations from all the different agencies that apply to your firm. So we talk about increased efficiencies in a job that does take work and time, but we are doing all we can to minimize that work. We're building accountability inside the system. There's abilities to delegate from an owner to either inside the organization or outside the organization, and so those tasks get done. We're hoping we're going to reduce liability. Cyber threats are always the case. You can't 100% protect against them, but if you're following the regulations as we've laid out in Buckler, you have an information security standard that's better than most, frankly. Increased compliance, we've hammered that heavily, of course. Reduce risk, and we're creating communication when it's very difficult between two very important and increasingly important areas of these firms, which is compliance and information security. How do we work with RIA networks? So why would they care about this? Of course, RIA networks are all about trying to deliver the best solutions to their member firms. We can do that by educating through the network, educating the members of the RIA network. We can build an affiliate relationship where Buckler is available and there's a fee arrangement between the networks. And then we also avail reseller relationships with a number of different organizations. Not sure if RIA networks are in a position for that. I do think 1 and 2 are probably the most easy entry points into Buckler.
Yeah, tell me, Scott, one thing that I want to make sure we touch on, I know we're right towards the end here, is Open VRM, because over the last year or two, due to the compliance requirement of vendor verification, and what, that's a question I got a whole lot. And this is one thing that opened Buckler up to me, but tell us about Open VRM, what it is and what it costs, and basically how it works.
Well, when you talk with any CCO about vendor risk management, you can just kind of see the exasperation just wash across their face. They know they have to do it. It again is another can be a time-consuming effort. And time is money, so it could be costly as well. So what we've done is by powering what we call Open VRM through Buckler. So all the Buckler features we've talked about to some degree, the policy matching and the regulations, are inside of our Open VRM system. It's our freemium module. It enables vendors and clients to, for free, both of them, to perform the vendor risk management function that needs to be done by the regulated firms. The regulators and the agencies are saying to the firms, because we don't have jurisdiction over the vendors, you have to go, do due diligence and check to make sure they're following the same regulations that apply to you. Otherwise, there's a risk, and you need to find a way to mitigate that. That work is getting done with around 996, maybe almost 1,000 vendors in the system. I'd say about 100 of them have fully completed the full questionnaire for the clients that are using it, the open VRM clients. That we are continuously finding new clients and new vendors. So we're growing that rapidly, because it is both a free solution and will always be a free solution, but also because of the way in which it's powered by Buckler and does the right job that needs to be done by regulated firms in doing the diligence on the vendors.
Well, that's, I'm grateful that Vincent and the Buckler team had the foresight to say, hey, they can do it once and share it with the industry. And so I think that's one of those things that is an easy win.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that was very forward thinking by Vincent and the team. And we treat Buckler and Open VRM as part of the family, but it's very much a different focus, because we know this is a huge solution that needs to be solved for on the VRM side. So is the cyber, but the more that we can create value here, right, the more we can kind of just continue to generate awareness overall of cybersecurity and cyber compliance.
right.
So everybody on the call, or everybody who listens to the recording, will get a copy here of our takeaway, just to kind of highlight where RIA networks can jump in and build more trust with a lot of their members and add more value with their members. And so with that, Chad, I want to thank you once again for being the MC.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. And for those that joined us, I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your busy day. If anybody has any questions, they can reach out to Scott. If they have questions on insurance or cyber insurance, what have you, they're welcome to reach out to me. Number one thing is we just want to be a good resource, help the advisor community get stronger. There's certainly plenty of bad actors hammering at our door every day. So the stronger we can build that wall between you and them, the better we can do. So thank you.
Thank you. We do it better together. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye now.